How to learn music online. Learning music online. Oof. Like, at this point, there's so many choices to go down. Like, when I first started, it was basically like little interviews from Guitar World put into PDFs and put on someone's website, or like some tabs that were maybe right. And that's about it. And like a horrible MIDI software, which I was thankful for at the time, absolutely. And that was kind of it. And if I got something, a little gem of information from an interview, it was how it worked for whoever that person was. So when someone asked Ingve, what he practiced or something, and he's like, I don't practice, I just play. And I'm like, oh, I guess that's what you do. I guess that's how that works. And it turns out it works for him. Didn't work for this guy. Now there's way more sources to compile information from and decide for yourself what works best for you. As I mentioned, since I started and was using the internet a little bit, the resources have grown a ridiculous amount online. From beginner to advanced stuff, maybe less so very esoteric stuff, but from beginner to advanced, there's plenty of YouTube channels, websites, courses, books. There's probably like 150 books on scales at this point teaching you the exact same scales. There's so many different kinds of resources. When I started using YouTube as a learning source, everything kind of ended up being able to be broken down into 3 different categories. Informative, people who might not be necessarily entertaining, but wow, you really need to watch that video because you'll learn logic better, or you'll learn whatever, the scales better or something like that. Infotainment, you learn something, but it's also fantastically edited with lots of memes or something like that, and it's like a great time, and you learn a little something. And then very beginner clickbait, where it'd be like, you have to know this. This was the best lesson that broke apart the fretboard. And generally there are lessons that you'd be like, oh, I read that in like a book, and it was a very, Guitar Method 1. It'd be like, use a metronome. Something like that. Not that use a metronome is good advice, but I found for me that, when it was 5 or 10 things you must know now, a lot of them happened to be very, very similar. There wasn't a big difference in the information. While it might be seen as annoying to have to check many sources for the same information, what you do end up getting is many different perspectives on the same information. There have been plenty of times when I've been taught something, and then I got taught it again, and I got taught it again, and none of those times did it sink in, and then someone just said it a little differently and taught it again, and all of a sudden I was like, oh, why didn't they just say that from the beginning? And you get a better chance of being able to do that with this many sources being available. For undergrad, you studied a lot of jazz there. Hardly would consider myself a jazz player. 9 years go by, I enter into a graduate program. I'm like, well, I know jazz a little bit better. Within a few months, I'm like, I don't know jazz at all. It took about 1.5 years, and then, COVID hit, everything got shut down. But also, a lot of people became very available online for clinics or lessons or what have you, which would be a silver lining, I guess. So at this point, I have a clinic this day, a lesson this day, another clinic, and then, my regular teachers for school. And at that point, I'm basically surrounded by amazing players and bouncing all of their ideas off each other. I'm hardly good at jazz now, but there was one specific one where I took a lesson Julian Lage told me about, and I brought it to another jazz teacher, Bruce, and, Bruce kind of took his lesson and added his own twist to it, and it was basically running through a standard, no metronome, just very, very slowly, trying to find little chromatic lines by ear to connect the chords, try to use as much voice hitting as possible within the chords, and not, hitting familiar drop 2s or drop 3s or anything like that, just picking 2 or 3 notes at a time. And that was amazing. I loved doing it. It sounded gorgeous. I was learning a lot as soon as I picked up the tempo and would play a standard at tempo. There's a lot of these different ideas where I was like, oh, I know this works there. I know this works there. Huge breakthrough for me. Couldn't have come later. Like, it took forever to get that. But I had heard the same thing. Voice lead, little this, little that. And I'm like, I don't, I get what you're saying in theory, but I don't know how to apply it. And I finally got it. So in a lot of scenarios, you just need to be taught it over and over and over again, same way, different times. If you've ever taught anybody anything, you'll know sometimes, you might be thinking as a teacher, how are you not getting this? And then you try to re-explain it like 4 or 5 different ways, and they finally click, and you're like, oh, I see how I could have been more clear. So there is the possibility, there's a greater chance that you'll be able to understand more, because you'll be able to, again, check sources and interpret the same information many different ways. Another plus to the online experience is that you're dealing with people in a much more personal way. You could just DM anyone. You could just, you could just message anybody. You can just comment and then end up, even if you're not commenting with or talking to the person from the video, you're talking to the people in the comment section. You can bounce off ideas a lot, and it ends up humanizing the experience a lot more. So when I was growing up, I would hear, again, Yngwie's approach of I don't practice, I just play. And then I would hear Steve Vai's approach of I practice for 20 hours a day and I never sleep. And then I would hear, these crazy practice times. And if, that's what you need to be if you want to be a virtuoso. I think someone like Julian Lodge is a virtuoso, and I think he practices about 2 hours a day, by his own admission. Now, I'm sure he spent more time in his teens. Now I have a lot of different, personalized experiences of like, hey, here's this information. Also, here's how this information was useful to me. Here's how maybe I couldn't utilize it. Here's someone else's experience. Oh, okay. You're better able to, suss out what might work for you. Even with that information, I would suggest taking any kind of new thing you're trying to learn and try to put it into your practice routine for about a month. And if you do it steadily, like every day, every other day for a month, you'll know if it's kind of for you or not. Like, I see no improvement in 30 days. Get rid of it. Or, wow, this makes total sense and everything makes more sense now and I've become a virtuoso in 30 days. Great. Keep doing that. I often talk out these ideas, there are these talking points with friends of mine, and I actually called a friend of mine, Ben, about this one. Because he always has, a bit different of a perspective than I do. And it's really great to hear his ideas of how things can work and bounce them off. Something that got brought up to him was not forgetting that just because you're watching videos about sick legato technique, or you're watching videos about jazz, country, bluegrass, blues, whatever, just because you're soaking in that information doesn't mean that you've actually practiced anything. You're basically just really preparing for practice. Now you're going to be super prepared. But at a certain point, you're just procrastinating practice. The practice happens with the phone off, the computer off. It happens, focused. You're not watching videos. Again, it's cool information, and you're learning a lot of it, maybe intellectually, but you need to be able to reproduce it yourself. You need to be able to understand it well enough to teach it and execute the knowledge that you have. Don't feel bad if you fall into that trap. We all do at some point. But it's just something to be aware of. God knows there's so many things I've seen videos on where I'm like, that sounds cool. I guess I learned something today. And then I'm like, nah, I didn't really, but it still feels nice. You just can't make that your main habit. I hope this brought some perspective to the online learning experience, as it is sometimes vast and overwhelming. Please comment below, subscribe, etc. And please ask me questions. I love talking to you guys. So thanks a lot for watching.